The suicide of a South Korean teacher nearly a year ago triggered weeks of protests by educators and led to new laws to protect them from abusive students and parents. CNA's senior Korea correspondent Lim Hyun-suk finds out what has changed since then.
This video went viral last month. It shows a third-grade student slapping the vice principal when he tried to stop the boy from leaving school without permission. He did not try to defend himself, which education experts say is understandable.
교감 선생님은 뒷짐을 지고 뺨을 맞아요. 혹자는 이런 얘기합니다. 그 왜 그러지? 애를 손을 잡고 적극적으로 말리고 못하게 해야지 이런 얘기합니다. 현실을 모르는 얘기예요. 만일 그 아이의 손을 잡았다가 팔자국이 남으면 어떻게 될까요? 당연히 아동학대로 신고됩니다.
Kim Dong-seok, the director of Teachers' Rights at the Korean Federation of Teachers Association, says teachers in South Korea have suffered abuse by students and their parents for years. Such cases often go unreported due to reasons like fear of retaliation, lack of support, and cultural norms that discourage them from speaking out.
그 다음에 선생님한테 아주 불손하게 하거나 문을 꽝 닫고 나가는 거나 손가락 욕을 한다거나 뭐 이런 욕을 부분을 신고를 한다면 사례가 되게 많을 거예요. 그럴 때마다 참거나 못 본 채 하거나 넘어가는 경우도 상당히 많다.
The issue came to light in July last year after a first-grade teacher at Soi Elementary in Seoul took her life in school. Her colleagues said she suffered harassment from parents. Her death sparked rallies calling for measures to safeguard teachers' rights. And authorities made key changes, including providing teachers with some protection from being sued for child abuse. Numbers of such cases fell drastically following the new regulations. 385 cases of child abuse were filed by parents against teachers between September last year and April this year, compared to more than 1,700 in 2022 and 1,200 in 2021. Complaints and lawsuits by parents are also no longer the responsibility of teachers but the principal. Teachers' personal data, like their mobile phone number, is also no longer handed out to parents.
Teachers, however, say there's not been much improvement. A recent survey by the Korean Federation of Teachers Unions showed that 78% of almost 11,400 teachers did not think conditions had changed significantly. But teachers we spoke with acknowledged the public awareness of the issue has grown.
인식이 퍼졌다는 데에서 좀 더 의미가 있는 것 같고요. 어떤 법에 있어서 좀 실효적이다라고 하면 아직도 이제 아동학대에 대한 신고는 계속 이어지고 있고 민원 대응 같은 경우도 학교에서 인력이 부족하다 보니까 제대로 그 절차가 진행되지 않는 경우도 있어서 실효성이 막 크다고 하기는 아직은 좀 체감상 좀 어려워하고 있는 부분입니다.
The 30-year-old teacher does not want to be identified as he is still scarred by his own experience. He was sued by a mother for emotional abuse a few years ago after he scolded a child for using foul language and disrupting the class. He won the case, but it left him with post-traumatic stress disorder.
학생과 학부모에 대한 마주대할 때 이제 두려움이 좀 커졌었던 것 같아요. 경찰서에서 조사를 받고 하는 과정에서 교사로서 그동안 들였던 노력이 통째로 부정당하는 것 같은 그런 좌절감 같은 거를 이제 많이 느꼈었고 서희초 사건을 마주하게 됐는데 그런 과정에서 또 아는 선생님들과 대화하는 과정에서 좀 위로 같은 거를 얻었던 것 같아요.
Experts suggest the situation is partly caused by certain societal values in South Korea.
이 한국 사회의 굉장히 독특한 이제 가족주의 내지는 심하게 표현하면 가족 이기주의. 그래서 내 아이에 대한 어떤 집중적인 투자를 하는데 내 아이를 누군가 건드렸을 때 부모들이 참아내지 못하는. 근데 그게 부모의 특권의식이랑 연결이 됐을 때 그때 그게 결국은 어떤 이제 교권 침해로 이어지는.
With South Korea having the world's lowest birth rate, parents are likely to remain highly protective of their children, meaning the issue may not go away anytime soon. Lim Yeon-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Let's explore teacher abuse across East Asia a little bit more, and let's invite CNA's senior correspondent Lim Yeon-suk in Seoul and Yvette Lau, she's mental health counselor and former teacher, employee assistance program counselor, speaking to us from Hong Kong. My first question is to you, Yvette, and I want to pick up something interesting actually from the story that that Yeon-suk did, which you just heard. This distorted sense of parental privilege that we're seeing in South Korea. Yvette, is it common in other East Asian countries with low birth rates and high parental investment in their children's education?
Yes, I think so. That's what we're seeing here in Hong Kong, as well as sometimes in Singapore as well. We see that there's a lot of parental involvement and investment in the financial sense, as well as time. Taken by parents to invest in their child's education. And with that, there's an increase in pressure, there's an increase in expectations from the parents towards the teachers, towards the school.
Now, Yeon-suk, we know that South Korea, they're struggling with perennial low birth rates, and it looks like it's not going to be picking up anytime soon. Do you then think that this pressure from overly protective parents will continue to affect these teachers for a good period of time?
Oh, I think so. And, experts also think that this issue is not going to go away anytime soon. South Korea has the world's lowest birth rate, and data here does show that South Korean parents now only have one child. And there's also data showing that in 2022, more than 6 out of 10 babies were first children for most South Korean parents. And it was also the first time that this proportion surpassed 60%. And so even parents themselves here know that this is a problem. And in fact, I spoke to one mother who has 2 children, and this is what she said.
많이들 흔하다고는 생각하고는 있는 것 같아요. 왜냐하면 요즘에는 아이들도 적게 낳는 추세이기도 하지만 너무나 자기 자식이 좀 소중하고 끔찍하다 보니까 학교에도 연락을 더 자주 하게 되는 것 같고, 그러다 보면서 무슨 일만 생겨도 작은 일에도 이제 학교에 자주 연락을 하게 되는 건 맞는데.
Yvette, I have a question for you. If something like what happened here in South Korea with that boy slapping that vice principal happened somewhere else, like in Hong Kong or Singapore or elsewhere in East Asia, would the vice principal try to defend himself? Would his reaction have been different from what what we saw in South Korea? Because I'm trying to see if this is a Korean problem or something faced by most teachers in East Asian countries.
Yeah, I think that there's a societal shift in the way in their expectations towards the teachers these days. I've personally never come across a child slapping or hitting a staff member to that degree. And I think that in Hong Kong and in Singapore, there are safeguarding measures put in place, school policies put in place and are enforced by the school leaders to avoid such situations. So I'm hoping that that's not a common sight that we see, and it's certainly not very common in Hong Kong and in Singapore, thankfully.
Right. Now, Yeon-suk, aside from having, the lowest birth rate in the world, South Korea also has the highest youth suicide rate, or one of the highest, and probably attributed to very intense academic pressure. There's also a lack of balance in their lives as they're trying to, pursue all these grades. Are there any initiatives that are implemented to try and reduce the student stress and sort of promote, well-being instead?
Well, I think, following the death of that teacher, I think that's something that the education minister here is trying to come up with, because South Korea, as you said, does have a serious problem. Its suicide rate right now is the leading cause of death among teenagers here in South Korea. And also stress from education is cited as one of the main reasons. Now, we've done stories, and I'm sure you've seen lots of stories about how the country here in South Korea comes to a complete stop on the day that high school students take their state exam. And this is one test that, is so crucial because parents believe and the students believe that it can determine which university they'll be getting into, possibly what kind of jobs they'll be getting after graduation, and even their marriage. And, we even have the government offices, the banks, the stock market, all starting 1 hour late to make way for the students. And even planes are banned from flying here during one of the listening tests. So it's that important here in South Korea. It shows how important education is. And experts do say that there needs to be a way for South Korean students to be able to do something else, to release that stress. And, because they do believe that that could help them do better in school. And, while doing this story, I spoke to several teachers, and I spoke to one high school teacher who told me this.
아이들 역시도 좀 특별한 시간에 선생님을 만나다 보니까 좀 더 친밀감을 많이 느끼기도 해서 학생들이 학교를 더 재밌게 다닐 수 있는 계기가 되기도 하고, 또 제가 이제 일과 중 수업을 할 때는 아이들 역시 더 집중을 할 수 있는 그런 계기가 되는 것 같아서 아이들뿐만 아니라 저에게도 긍정적인 영향을 많이 끼친다고 생각합니다.
Now, I've been told that there have been attempts to try and get more of those afternoon activities, like the cheerleading class we just saw, incorporated into part of the school curriculum here in South Korea. But it hasn't been easy because parents here prefer that their children spend that extra time studying instead.
See that phenomenon across East Asia, even in Singapore. But while outdoor play, it is essential for students. Yvette, I'm wondering what sort of strategies have been proven effective in supporting the teachers, the mental health, and dealing with all that stress that they face from the parents, from the school, from the students.
I think that as teachers, there's still a lot of stigma involved in seeking help. It's difficult when a teacher is worried about what happens if they come forward, they seek help. And so a lot of the strategies need to, I think, first revolve around knowing what the teacher's needs are. School leaders can do that by encouraging communication, by understanding the issues that teachers struggle with, their challenges, and creating that culture of open communication, that culture of support. Yes.
And do we have that, Yoon-suk, do we have that open communication, that culture in South Korea? I mean, as in your report, right? I mean, it took a protest for the needle to move somewhat. And even though it's questionable whether it's effective in the end. So, I mean, is that what it takes? That, the teachers, they have to keep protesting, or they have to keep opening up to voice their concerns?
Well, speaking out is something that South Korean teachers haven't done and don't do now, too. And so I think that is the main problem here in South Korea. But as you said, it did for this issue, for the students to come out in the streets because, you were seeing thousands of teachers out in the streets making their statements and making their voices heard. And as a teacher said, in my story, it did help the teachers realize that they were not alone. And so it shows that how much they don't discuss these issues even among themselves. And the other teachers were also saying, and they were realizing that other teachers were also facing similar abuse by parents. Now, we have seen lots of protests here in South Korea, but it's not often, and it is rare to see teachers coming out in the streets and speaking out. And in fact, President Yoon Suk-yeol at the time last year did order South Korean officials to listen to the teachers' demands and try to work to protect their rights. And that's why the National Assembly also then took action by coming out
out with a bill to protect teachers' rights. And, teachers we spoke to said it was very sad that all these actions and they were being taken after the death of that 23-year-old school teacher. But for them, it was a good thing that the government finally realizes that there is a serious problem here in South Korea. And at least they're trying to do something about it. And people out in the streets are also aware of this issue.
And I think for starters, the communication lines got to keep them open. Let's hope that the situation will improve sooner rather than later. Well, thanks so very much, Yoon Suk, for that wonderful story. And also Yvette Lau speaking to us from Hong Kong.